Welcome back. Good to see you again. Thank you again, Taso, for being here.
My pleasure.
Yes, I mean, as we talk about, it's no surprise that talent issues, paucity of talent across the landscape, especially in areas of growing importance. One thinks of data analytics, a topic that's been in conversations, of artificial intelligence, and certainly of blockchain as well. If your board, if your C-suite is asking you as a CIO or an IT director, what are we doing in this area, and how do we start to create maybe a beachhead of sorts, leveraging some of these opportunities? The mind goes quickly to who's going to do that? How do I find the talent? And in a market like London, other cities in the UK, to say nothing of other areas, that's not an easy bridge to cross necessarily, but it's a bridge that you help organizations cross. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So we noticed this problem in Silicon Valley in New York City, and we're a US-based company, so that was pretty natural for us because in the US it's very, very constricted, especially at the highest of skill levels. So really great engineers, they're generally working for Google, Facebook, et cetera, and so you see this acutely in Silicon Valley. And so naturally, for us, it was how can we bring talent abroad to the US, but do that in the same way that it was happening at that caliber level with Google and Facebook, and keep that standard in place, but still have a remote team that's very high quality. And so we looked at how do we create processes that will work virtually to be able to screen out candidates from, let's say, Argentina or Brazil that were in very similar time zones in the US, to be able to work with companies at a very high quality level and a very high integrity level. And that was sort of the basis for the idea. And since it's grown to this global network that all companies from all over the world use, I think on our client side, we probably work with over, clients from over 90 countries or so, talent from over 100 countries. And so it's a pretty phenomenal network, and it's grown to something that I think is applicable in most countries now.
Can you talk a little bit about that growth? Because it's staggering. You've shared some of the figures with me, percentages, dollars, et cetera. If you care to share, I think it's a remarkable story.
Yeah, sure. So the World Economic Forum says that hypergrowth is 40+% year over year. We've certainly hit that mark ever since we've been in existence every single year. However, there have been many hundreds of percent years.
That's excellent.
Yeah, it's been a phenomenal growth story, and we're now the most valuable freelance marketplace in the world. We're the largest high-skilled freelance marketplace in the world in terms of active jobs that are happening on our platform with high-skilled labor. And high-skilled labor we considered software engineers, designers, not, let's say, a crowdsourcing platform or, virtual assistants or things that aren't considered, very high skilled.
Yeah, and I know, Taso, from our past conversations, one of the things that's so impressive is your means of finding the talent. First, of course, you got to find the people who can do the job. You need to find the jobs that need to be done. You need to put those together. The work is done, and then you evaluate how has it done.
Sure.
And the numbers, again, are sort of off the charts in terms of satisfaction.
Yep.
So if that all begins with having great people, can you talk a bit about that filtering process and the fact that, as you say, you're going to very non-traditional, at least as we in the Western world might think of it, some non-traditional places to find enormous talent?
Yeah, so I'll speak to how we actually curate that.
Yes.
And I think that's probably relevant to a large portion of this audience. You really need to craft a screening process that speaks to whatever role that you're gonna bring into your organization. And so with Toptal, it's no different. If we want to get in blockchain experts, we need blockchain experts who are world-class to be able to screen other blockchain experts. And we work with them to create a curriculum, or rather a screening process that gauges the other talent that are coming in. And so we really have done an incredible job at that. When I was previously at Slide, which was acquired by Google, we had incredible engineers, and that's in large part why Google acquired our company. Now, as being part of that company, I learned how to screen for great engineers and sort of the level of depth that we went to relative to other companies. And I took those principles and I said, wow, if you actually apply these to the virtual world, they work just as well. And I think that's where actually outsourcing companies and other companies that are doing consulting got a bad rap, where they sort of took as many people as they could, contracted them out. If you actually instilled those screening processes even into the outsourcing companies, I think you'd have a similar quality. We just did that from the start because it was natural from my previous experiences, and that's how we formulated the company.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about the ROI on using Toptal? So, on the one hand, you have ready access to talent with great experience, and especially if yours is an organization that, let's say, is not in London, is not in like a premier place where a lot of talent is, the ability to access people more readily who might not be willing necessarily or able to move to where you are, at least as one lens to this. But can you talk a bit about how organizations ought to be thinking about the ROI on services like this?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just actually speaking about this 2 weeks ago on Fox News, and we were discussing, is Toptal expensive? And my answer was, expensive is relative. Accenture's expensive, McKinsey's expensive. A lot of outsourcing companies, especially smaller ones, are certainly not expensive, but in the long term, you pay for that because you end up not getting the quality that you need, et cetera. And so I would say, and I would make the bold statement that our engineers are certainly, and all of our talent really, is certainly of the talent that you would find at, in our finance expert vertical, the same level as Goldman Sachs people, because a lot of them are ex-Goldman. In our design vertical, people from IDEO, our engineering vertical, or software development vertical, ex-Googlers and world-class engineers who are quite known. And so, ensuring that that you are really just, I guess, not overpaying through a high margin cost structure, like most of the outsourcing companies and let's say traditional firms have garnered or sort of retained, I think is an important point to this. So if you look at actually the cost that goes to paying for, let's say, a $200 an hour engineer at Accenture, most of that cost doesn't go to the engineer, right? In our model, it does, because we don't have the overhead. We don't have a building that says, Accenture or PwC on it.
Right.
And PwC are our auditors, so I think they do some things that we'll probably never do. But we just don't have the cost that they do, and so we can charge less. Since all of our talent works remotely, they're more attracted to a company like ours. So I think the whole industry is really changing to be more cost effective. And I like using that word cost effective because I don't say that our talent is cheap or anything else. It's just a better model overall. And it allows for it.
And I'm also curious, how do you see leveraging a Toptal as a complement to building your own skills internally? How do you see those two kind of operating in concert? So there's a new technology that you want to begin to invest in. There's a new means of mining your data for better insights. I don't have the talent today. I access Toptal, but I also want to grow some of it on my own. How do you see those different puzzle pieces fitting together?
Yeah, I like this concept of the blended workforce, as they say, which is having a portion of your team in-house and possibly the owners of the product or the owners of the engineering so that they're part of your organization, and then augmenting that through ideally means like Toptal or other means that actually allow you to get remote talent quickly injected into the organization. Because I think today, especially within the US, it's difficult to say that you're going to get in-house talent at any sort of reasonable speed. And so you see pervasively, especially in the US, people leveraging remote talent like crazy to augment their current teams where the product owners and the engineering owners are already part of the organization. So to me, that's really a perfect way to build an organization where you have the difficult recruiting problems solved by working with talent remotely, and then you have the ownership and incentive problems by having people in-house.
Interesting. I do want to talk about blockchain in particular. This is, as has come up a couple times in the conversations today, at a minimum, a great curiosity to a lot of people in technology, and at a maximum, an area of great investment. Still tends to be early stages across most organizations, but something that, as I speak on a weekly basis with multiple CIOs, seems to be coming up again and again as one of those things that's on the roadmap, and where there's a hunger to understand what are the true use cases here. Several months ago, you developed a blockchain offering.
Yes.
And I would love to understand, of course, a little bit about that. And then by extension, what recommendations you would have, generally speaking, for CIOs who wish to sort of begin to go into the water and swim around the blockchain opportunity a little bit further?
Sure. So when you look at blockchain, I liken it to, let's say, the wave of the internet back in the 90s. People were really excited about it. They threw money at things. There was hype around it. Time magazine and every other magazine had it on the cover in some form, whether it was, the CEO of an internet company going IPO or somebody going bust or something like this. And you see something very similar today. And what that's usually a signal of is that, yeah, this is something to come, but that people generally don't understand it. And we actually ran a survey when we did our blockchain launch. We only actually found about 5,000 engineers in the world that are doing blockchain at any sort of reasonable degree. And these 5,000 folks, by the way, were not like world-class level. This is research done with one of the big fours and ourselves to be able to conclude this. And I would say it's indisputable. If anything, there's no way there's 10,000. It's just not even possible. So many companies I've even heard claim, big consulting firms say they have 1,000 blockchain people. Well, I'll tell you, they don't have a fifth of the market. And so you really have to get experts to craft not only the screening processes, but help develop the products that are actually going to be in use. Because what I see pervasively, and I think this will ideally go away in the next 3 to 5 years, are folks who look at the blockchain, they understand the technology, and there are many variations of the blockchain, right? There are different ways of doing proof of work, proof of X, Y, or Z. There are many different variations of it, gossip protocols, et cetera, that are applicable to different products or different use cases, et cetera. You really have to understand those in the most intricate way. And the only way to truly do that is by working with engineers and people who actually understand the use cases to be able to develop them in a proper way. And I don't see that happening right now. I don't see people who are joining organizations who truly know what they're doing. I would say it's a bigger problem in blockchain than it is in other areas, probably because other areas are more mature and don't have as much hype. Also, the product development that I see going into blockchain is sort of willy-nilly. It's like, okay, it can be solved for contracts, great, we're a real estate company, let's get blockchain introduced. I mean, there's like 20 different flavors of blockchain. Which flavor are you gonna choose? Why? How are you gonna make that decision? Even if you got a great blockchain developer from us or somewhere else, you need to take in like 3 or 4 other opinions from other people who work on different types of blockchains. And so it's really important to have a holistic perspective when developing products, when developing the underlying components and technology. And that to me would be the most important thing when working with anyone in blockchain.
That's very interesting. I want to also, we'll open up for questions. So as in the past, please put your hand up, a microphone will find you. It also strikes me you have a keen understanding, awareness by virtue of demand for different verticals, different solutions, different technologies. The more you see people getting involved in blockchain by virtue of coming to you with this need and you fulfilling that need, I wonder what are some of the other areas that seem to be rising in demand and therefore sort of reflecting where technology is going, where folks like the ones in this room might consider as well as they're developing their strategies for the foreseeable future.
Sure. So there's been a stark rise in edutech, which is a sort of funny thing, but a lot of universities and a lot of companies have been cropping up that are really just pertinent to edutech. So universities...
Define the term, please.
Sure. So technology that's helping people either get educated or uncover what's happening within education. So I'll give you a really relevant example. So there's a rather known university that is now looking at data and trying to understand if we craft a curriculum around this data or really craft apps around this data that our students are giving us, how can we better educate our students? How can we give them better economic opportunities for their careers and try to look at the data that the university has, how the students are performing, and craft that from the data, almost sort of like a Moneyball approach to education. And so we've seen not one, not two, but many universities now looking at this data because it's new. There are new insights that are coming from this, and they want to develop a lot of educations around this. We also see a lot of LMS systems, learning management systems, that are coming to fruition, and I wouldn't say challenging universities, but either being complementary to universities or being alternatives to universities. And so there's a big wave of that, and there's a lot of nuance in terms of the statistics that shakes out of it and the product development that goes into it. And so recently we launched a edutech practice, et cetera. But yeah, there's a lot of things that are, I would say, trending and hot right now beyond edutech. And yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to see.
Yeah, very interesting. Questions from the audience? Who has a question for Taso? Well, let me ask you another as well. I mentioned earlier you were Forbes 30 under 30.
Sure.
Back when you were below 30, you are no longer. So no longer
got
qualified.
The gray now.
Yeah,
got the gray.
Exactly.
Almost 50 under 50.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier as well, you, Andreessen Horowitz was one of the early investors in the organization as well. Yours has been a really interesting entrepreneurial journey as well.
Sure.
Been involved in multiple companies, and your pathway to founding Toptal in 2010, I believe.
Yes, correct.
Yep. And can you talk a little bit about that? You also left college. Is it
left
early?
high school?
Left high school.
Yeah.
Forgive me. Yes. Okay. Didn't even go to college then.
Correct. Yes.
And so a theme here from across a couple of the conversations saw a pathway directly into the workforce as opposed to going to college.
Correct.
Can you talk about that sort of early inspiration in becoming an entrepreneur?
Well, I'll sort of segue. I'll start off
Please.
with why I dropped out of high school initially. I saw that the opportunity to learn software on my own was much more fruitful than learning it within an institution, especially from I guess you would call it a time cost basis. You know, if you're to do some sort of a time cost analysis, I think I was certainly on the right end of that because I learned how to write software proficiently, significantly more so than other professionals because I beat them out in interviews and et cetera. To be able to do what I needed to do with the resources that were available online. And I think that speaks to what the new era of technology and the new era of education has in store for the youth and actually for everybody here, because we can learn so much more easily online now. I happen to grow up in a small town that was pretty remote, and so the internet was something that I was sort of always on, and it gave me the ability to see very clearly that I could learn how to program. And I think, you know, for people who maybe don't have that that sort of drive or natural inclination to find these things out, I think you're gonna see more things like that come online and help people sort of take the same path that I took, but still have very successful careers and not have this sort of dropout notion have a stigma to it. So that speaks to sort of how I chose my career path and why I decided to be a self-taught programmer rather than a programmer who went through an academic institution. In regards to the entrepreneurial endeavor, Toptal is certainly a unique success story in that, you know, we've become the category leader in the freelance space for high-skilled labor especially, and we haven't taken a lot of outside capital. And the reason that we have done that is really primarily because we have a long-term vision, and we don't see taking in outside capital as a startup as something that is going to be very beneficial to having us develop the innovations and the long-term strategy that we have in store. And so, or at least in our minds. And so we may do that in the future, but when you start a company and you start to experience problems, and those problems will allow you to know if you're going to make it or break it, you take decisions significantly more seriously. And so you get to understand what problems exist within an organization, and that's really helped us bulletproof our screening processes, everything that we've done so far. And I think that's why we've been a very resilient company and have had such, you know, incredible reviews and success with our clients, blah, blah, blah. And so, you know, I think we just have a unique approach because it's worked for us, and we've said, if it works for us now, let's just continue this, and ideally we don't run out of money.
Doesn't look like you're on a path to that. I mentioned in the conversation with Andy Karabutis that one of the ambitions for a lot of IT executives is to join the boards of organizations. And a pathway often to do so is to join advisory boards of organizations. And I know this is actually something you're very interested in, is engaging the CIO community and developing advisory boards. The extent to which that may be something of interest to this group, I wonder if you can kind of just talk a little bit about your vision there.
Yeah, sure. So I'll actually speak to it on two fronts. So I'm on two boards, actually. I'm on Deepak Chopra's board, or was, because he just dissolved the entire board. And I'm also on the board of an organization called Next3B, which is a really fantastic organization started by the Tata family, Sir Ratan Tata, et cetera. And so what that has given me is exactly what was talked about by was it Andy?
Yes.
Previously, and it's so true, and I'm much less experienced, and so when I look at that, I'm like, wow, even in the 1 year, the 2 years that I've been on boards, I've seen things that have helped me garner a perspective that I never imagined I was even lacking in the first place. And so I think that's a very important thing. Likewise, we're working on formulating a CIO board to be able to get a perspective from CIOs and share our perspective with how talent is developing. And so if anyone in this room is interested in having a conversation about that, that's something we're still in the process of forming. And we certainly have some great folks on board already. So yeah, from the process of joining boards, I definitely share the exact same perspective that Andy has, which is joining boards can give you a phenomenal perspective, whether they're nonprofits or whether they're for-profits. I would advise one of both, because you get very different types of conversations that are in existence. And I also recommend doing what we're working to do, which is formulate a board that you think will fill a gap that's either in your knowledge base or the knowledge base of the organization that you're working within.
That's great. Well, Taso Du Val, what a remarkable story. We appreciate you sharing it with us. Join me in thanking Taso.
Thank you, Peter.
A pleasure.